Welcome to the Painter Marketing Mastermind Podcast, a show created to help painting company owners build a thriving painting business that does well over $1 million in annual revenue. I'm your host, Brandon Pierpont, founder of Painter Marketing Pros and creator of the popular PCA educational series, Learn, Do, Grow, Marketing for Painters. In each episode, I'll be sharing proven tips, strategies, and processes from leading experts in the industry on how they found success in their painting business. We will be interviewing owners of the most successful painting companies in North America and learning from their experiences. In this series titled Systems Beat Fear, John MacFarland of MacFarland Painting will be discussing how to overcome what can be scary chasms in your company's growth journey through the implementation of effective systems. It is a 5-part series. In episode 1, John discussed team pay philosophy and how it sets the stage for accountability in his company. In episode 2, this episode, John will cover growth sticking points he has experienced while scaling MacFarland Painting Company. In episode 3, John will deep dive into his systems for his office and sales. In episode 4, John will lay out the systems he uses to ensure success in his operations management and out in the field. And in episode 5, the final episode, John will discuss his unique approach to meetings and how they have become the most productive part of his team's week. If you want to ask John questions related to anything in this podcast series, you can do so on our exclusive Painter Marketing Mastermind podcast forum on Facebook. Just search for Painter Marketing Mastermind podcast forum on Facebook and request to join the group. Or type in the URL, facebook.com/groups/Painter Marketing Mastermind. Again, that URL is facebook.com/groups/Painter Marketing Mastermind. There you can ask John questions directly by tagging him with your question so you can see how anything discussed here applies to your particular painting company. We made it, John. We got through it. How you doing, man?
We're back. I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing well, brother. I'm excited for this. You and I are actually knocking out 2 podcast recordings this week, so we are on a bit of a roll. I feel like last time, when you're not connected about this this series, and you talked about how there are different scary points in a company's growth journey, and how you have found that you've had to kind of release control. I know Chris Elliott, he talks about EOS, and he presented on that at PCA Expo. He talks about releasing the bind and how that can be a pretty scary thing. And I feel like in episode 1, when we were talking about pay, we didn't really dive into the fear of that, which I'm sure there was when you transition from, an hourly model to, okay, we're going to go to a pretty different model.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today, these growth sticking points where you had to essentially leap over, a chasm in your business, which can be a scary thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of them. And if I think back, there were things that stressed me out. Buying my second van was more stressful than purchasing the building that we're in now at that time. And the more that you do them and they work out, the easier it gets to do it again and again. And I wish I had somebody to kind of tell me, okay, you gotta get a little bit more aggressive and make these jumps and work through that fear. And things will be fine. You're good at what you do. You got a good system. You got a good company. Quit worrying about it and just do it. So,
like you're saying, you were a little bit more financially reserved or cautious than maybe you should have been.
I just think I thought about stuff so much more. It stressed me out to think about not being at a job site, right? Or at least like getting to every job site. That was probably the biggest one early, was when we had 2 projects going on at once and I was the sole estimator salesperson. They're projects that I never saw after we had quoted. And that always stressed me out. Well, did they clean up this right? Was this done right? And it really took kind of writing what we now call our curbside report, training guys on, okay, how we park a vehicle, how do we do a pre-job walkthrough with clients, how do we do team introductions, where we're doing a staging area, our shop in the home. And those things stressed me out when I was like, if we just write it down, it's not that hard. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, did Tim's team do this? And it's like, let's just make a checklist and then I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it, man. So you were doing, when you started, were you doing the estimating and the project management both?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. And so the role that you released first was the project management.
Yeah. And I think probably selfishly, I really liked the estimating. I liked that customer interaction. I wasn't, even early on, I wasn't a higher skill set than some of the guys that I had working with me. So giving up that from a craftsmanship side was actually easier for me mentally than the sales. The sales I really liked, I enjoyed. I felt like it was a way for me to get the project set up and kind of on a platter with, at that time, they were just handwritten notes for the team of order of operations and, what we're doing when and what day. And so I felt like that was easier for me once I got it on a platter. The day-to-day running of that project was easier to hand off than the sales.
So was this the first major chasm? So you giving up the project management and not being able to keep on top of that? Was that your first jump or was there one before that?
I think that's my first jump because that happened before we started renting our first little shop space. That was another one that was kind of a big hurdle for me mentally. And at the time, I mean, economically, it kind of stressed me out to have this fixed bill every month that it's not like at that time I didn't run a storefront. So it was just kind of glorified storage. And then after we're in that for a little bit, we realized the culture gets better when we have this meeting place. And even though it was kind of a hole, honestly, it was nothing to, broadcast online and show pictures of, but it was a central location where we met every day, got game plans, came back every day. That's allowed us to start storing some materials. So, but that was after the giving up of the project management on every project.
When did you get the second van?
The second van would have been, I mean, years and years ago, but it would have been, we probably had 4 people when I bought the second van. I still had my truck and trailer that I was using. So we were, kind of the 2 butts in a seat is my model right now still. And getting to that point where the expense and then worrying about, driving to the billboard and what if there's, bad driving and all these other things I couldn't control. We got the second vehicle at about 4 or 5 staff.
Okay. Were you still doing the project management then?
I was, yeah.
You were. Okay. So the scary second vehicle came before releasing of the project management.
Yeah, but they were kind of one and the same, I did like a lot of folks do, and you leave the job midday to go do some quotes, you do some quotes in the evening. And, but all of that started to get to be too much where I had to just eliminate some jobs that were simple enough or well run enough that I didn't have to physically show back up to.
Yeah. So you purchased a building recently, is that right?
Yeah, we closed on a building last February, just down the street from where we had 3 leases. We got our first lease in that area in 2013, and then kind of took on the neighbors over the last few years. The building we're in now is 43,000 square feet.
Wow, it's a big building, man.
Yeah, our showroom here is about 4,000 square feet in and of itself. So,
wow. Are you guys renting out any of that, or are you using all that?
we're not using all of it, but we're using enough of it in the way we set up the building when we did some of the build out that the space that we don't use is only a few thousand feet. And we felt like it was better to have that at our disposal and design the layout so that we grew into it rather than subletting some odd corner of it. It just didn't work out the way the building's set.
That's astronomical. 43,000 square feet. So you were less afraid of a 43,000 square foot building purchase than you are for the second van.
Yeah, I think so, because I have all the metrics now to know what makes sense when, and what is our tipping point from profitability. Here we have about 11,000 square feet that the cabinet division occupies. And so they're doing 12 kitchens a week out of that. That's easy to just say, okay, this square footage produces this. Where generally what we do, it was just storage. So it's a little harder to kind of quantify that.
Yeah.
And so separating the cabinets from the rest of the company was kind of important. Just dust, dirt, odor, all those things. So they're kind of their own little corner that's, got a couple sections of walls and hallways to get to. Their own access from the back parking lot and the side parking lot where they just drive their vehicles right into their own private area. It's not intermixed, which is kind of nice. And that segment was easy to quantify. The showroom is a big scary monster for us a little bit, and how we're using this and the amount that actually cost us. But the traffic in the showroom is proving to be, well worth that. And from a design standpoint, we have a full-time designer now too. So as we're still kind of weaseling our way through this and growing and figuring out what's working and what gets people to leave their home and come and see us. There's some things that definitely people have no issue driving, 20, 30, 40 minutes to get here to actually do that design work. And so we're just leaning into that a little bit and eliminating some stuff we thought might work that isn't working as well. So that's a little still up in the air. But again, that space is kind of situated that we could reclaim it and change it or parse that off into offices if we ever decided we wanted to go another direction. But it seems like it's going in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So I guess the thing that made you less afraid of it was the data that you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. And I don't even mean that the money was there that, oh, this is a no brainer. I had enough data on projections to know where we were going and what things were going well for us that I felt really comfortable with it.
So with you knowing what you know now, you're a much more seasoned business owner. You've grown a company. What you run now is not what you used to run. You have to be a different person. As your company grows, you have to grow. If you could go back and you were buying that second van, what would you tell yourself? Would you think about it differently? Because you probably didn't have as much data back then. You didn't
Yeah.
have the track record. You probably didn't have as much capital. So there are real reasons to be a little more reticent. What would you tell your past self?
Good question. I mean, for me, it would have been what is actually making you nervous or afraid of this? And if it's not controlling the van, wear and tear, repairs, the driving billboard, it's not the same for everybody. It kind of depends on your staff. I think you can write rules and processes that take that fear away. There was a time back then when I got those vans that on Saturday I would drive up to the shop and then take the vans and go to the oil change places. Well, that's a ridiculous waste of time for a business owner. And so it was really clear that we just have to put in, scheduled appointments every 3 months or whatever was reasonable, because I didn't trust people to read the odometer either. And so for me, it was easier to pay for an oil change maybe a little early and just do it on a schedule rather than expect guys to look at the tag in your window and say, oh, I got to make time for an oil change. That just became an appointment. They'd come in and turn in the receipt and it was done every 3 months and, set it and forget it type of mentality.
Right. Were you out there washing the vans?
I didn't wash them, but that was another thing, right? So trying to schedule that because our vans have ladders and racks. They don't go through any car washes easy.
Yeah.
So we scheduled, every couple of weeks, one of the power washing crews would, come back and they'd be spraying down the vans so they were reasonably presentable. And
Sure.
that just got scheduled,
Yeah.
So some of these things that are fears, I think if you just start to list them out and rank them in terms of importance, you can schedule those things so that it's not that intimidating.
Well, and I like your approach there a lot of asking yourself, hey, what about it is scaring you? And I think that's something that most people don't do really about anything that I've found helpful, just not even just business, just anything. If it's making you really uncomfortable or nervous, if you sit in and you focus on it and you try to peel back the layers, you can usually find something. A lot of times it's sort of surprising what you end up finding. Sounds to you like it wasn't. I mean, naturally, I would think, and I think a lot of people would think you were afraid to buy the van. Therefore, you didn't know if you could afford the van. You were worried you wouldn't have the money or the business would go under. But it sounds like it was more of a control issue.
Yep, for sure. My personality, 100%. It was all control and fear because I was used to having your hands in it, and we start to take that away. I have found with almost everything we did then and do now, the faster I take my hands out of it, but have it set up that it's going to meet my expectations or functionally work for the staff or our clients, the better off it is because the crews take a sense of ownership in that, and their stuff looks as good or better than my personal truck back in the day. And it was something I was concerned about.
So who sets this up? Like you mentioned a checklist, something like that. Do you, for every part of your company, when you're going to step out, do you set it up? Do you ever task people with setting it up? How does that work?
Yeah, now I task a lot of people with that. So writing our interior painting process, exterior painting process, cabinet processes, the first iteration of those I had my hands in. And now it's way beyond whatever I would have provided them. They're revising those. I'm a pretty big believer in if you allow people some freedom in that, they have a lot better ideas than you maybe have because you did it your way because it worked for you, but it might not work for an employee. Even from, here's a goofy example, but our business cards, we provide business cards to every staff member we have. I make the joke, we have a lot of guys with beards that look generally similar. And in a house, a homeowner may forego a conversation because they don't want to offend somebody and say, is it John, Jake, Jim, Tom? I don't remember. They get business cards. That's a cheap thing that gives our employees a sense of pride, but it also really just makes it easy for the homeowner to put a name to a face and maybe have a better dialogue about something. So, for me, giving them that type of control over some, input on things. I'm getting people that really feel like their ideas are heard and then often implemented. We're going to talk about meetings in depth, but my favorite part of these meetings is I get ideas from people that are using the things we've been using that I didn't have. I didn't have the electronic CRM and appointments and all these other things and emailing invoices and taking credit cards. If I left a job without a check, it was very difficult to collect. I didn't take credit cards until only 5 or 6 years ago, honestly. And so now it's really simple. So that process of conversation has been written by the staff because my point as an owner of trying to get paid is very different than them. Mine was kind of the scarcity mindset. I have to do this or I can't afford X, Y, and Z. Theirs is, hey, sir, this is just part of our process. Going to text or email you the quote or the invoice, which would you like? And then when we do our walkthrough, you're going to, sign off that the work is great and you're happy and you're going to make payment. It's really easy for them, but they had input in, some of those talking points of, hey, Brandon, would you like this text or email? They're not saying this big, scary, you're going to have to pay me at the end of the project and this uncomfortable conversation. It's just a very easy question. We're fine with either answer. Would you like a text or email? And that was someone else's idea, not mine,
Yeah, that's a great idea. I really like that. And I think when, as a business owner, you basically have to be a jack of all trades, right? So you kind of have to do everything when you're starting. And that means you're probably not doing really anything the best that it could possibly be done. You're kind of hacking it all together, making it presentable, making it work, iterating on it as you can. But then when you bring in people who you give them ownership over a certain domain within your company, they'll often, at least what I've found, they'll often come in and basically make it a lot better because they are not doing the other 90% of things. They're doing this 10% and they're going to knock it if they're the right person. And if you enable your team, they're probably going to knock it out of the park.
Yep. And that's hard for me personally. That was hard to let go. And I'm sure I'm very cavalier about it now. And it seems like these ideas are great. I'm sure if you talk to people 10 years ago, the impression would be I was not as open for their input and I was much more my way. And this is how we're doing it. I think part of that just takes time and maturity to let those things go. But I will never go back. It's one of those things. And someone asked me, they were kind of balking at the price of lettering a vehicle. And I said, once you letter a vehicle, you will never not letter a vehicle. It should have your stuff everywhere. I mean, that few $100s to wrap a car is not that big of an expense. Get over it, throw it on there. You'll never look back. And for me, that's a lot of things are that maybe I was slow at that time in transition. I was hung up on the changes because I had done it a certain way. But that's, I guess, kind of the central point of advice is the faster you can let go of those and empower people to make the call and have some skin in it. Things just grow faster than you can do by yourself.
Yeah, I love it. And I don't think you'd be where you're at if you didn't change. You were running a different company then. You were running a company of you, basically, one brain and maybe quite a few hands. But now you transitioned into a company that has a lot of brains.
Yeah.
Does it work better? Okay, cool. So your first major, the van, I know what was kind of like what we called a mini chasm, I guess. Your first major chasm, which was scary for you, was releasing of the project management. So I want to flesh it out fully. What was scary about that and how did you actually achieve it?
I had kind of foolishly led myself to believe that the end of the job close down and the detailed touch-ups and that walkthrough that I did the best job.
Only you can do it. No one can do it as well as you can do it.
100%. When I was on the job, I was being leaned on by the guys to do that. So it was just inherently my task. When you remove me out of the picture, they did it just as good. But I had fallen into this, well, this is my role job to go through and detail stuff out. And when I stepped out, we didn't have customer complaints, at a higher rate than we ever did before. We didn't have bad reviews. We didn't have callbacks. It was the same. So I was kind of almost blocking these people from developing and probably holding them down because I would grab the brushes and do my walkthrough and then tell the customer and have this big pomp and circumstance about how great does the job look as they're loading tools into the van. So I had kind of created that system of almost keeping them down and not giving them a chance to do that where they were just as capable.
Yeah.
And so getting my butt out of the way was critical to have them actually do, even with not a really well-written process of project close down. Inherently, these were qualified professionals that could do just a fine job. But to me, it was stressful because for years and months and whatever, that was my role. So how else am I going to do this?
Yeah. So in the spirit of the podcast of always trying to make things as actionable as possible, how do you make that checklist? If somebody's listening to this and maybe it's not the project management, maybe it is, maybe it's something else, and they know kind of what they do, but this idea of a checklist or an SOP has been an intimidating one for them. What do they do?
Well, I think you have to carve out time to actually write them down, and start with what you think you do the best and actually list out, that SOP from a job setup and a client walkthrough and talking about things and write it out. What we do as business owners, we get busy and we reinvent this wheel and we do it one off every single time instead of actually standardizing it and just writing it down. And so I found myself talking to different crews and saying, hey, remember on this project, we're starting Michigan's cool in the spring, right? So we start in the sun on exteriors. We go from left to right because hand maskers go that direction. That was a standard thing. And I found myself telling crews these things all the time where it's like, I can write it down once and then I just need to revisit it and refresh memories. I don't need to handwrite notes on all these job folders about stupid things that these people will retain anyhow. And so I would just schedule time. You're going to write this down. You're going to spend a few minutes to do it, but it's going to save hours and hours over the next couple months and hundreds of hours over a year. And that, to me, is probably the most useful time in a growing contractor's life, is to actually write that stuff down, get some input from your team, tune it up, make it where it's really easy to read, like that checklist format where it's not a big binder of manual, and then say, okay, let's run with this. And then every quarter, every 6 months, we're going to sit down and edit it. When we find that we're not really doing it this way anymore, let's just cross it off and edit it, or let's give options on how to do something. If there's realistic options, that's fine too. But I was too slow to write that stuff down. I got a business coach in 2012 that was very helpful for me to writing this down, and all the conventional business coach, remove yourself from the business, run the business, don't manage the business, don't just pay yourself to have a job, all those things. It took that guy working with him on a once a week basis to really have me say, okay, you're right, enough's enough. My wife was pregnant at the time. I saw what my days looked like. That was not what I wanted my life to be. And I said, I'm just going to start working on this. So the homework that he gave me was probably that catalyst of me saying, I really need to write this stuff down.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And it took you being mentally open-minded to it and looking at your life, deciding what you want. I think that's really important. I think for us business owners, entrepreneurs, we start down a path. Oftentimes we want financial freedom or, just the ability to navigate our own course. And then you start down this path, and sometimes you don't reevaluate what you should be doing, what you want. You just do it because you do it, because it's your business. It's what your business requires. And you do need to take a step back sometimes, like you just expressed. You took you step back, looked at what your day looks like as your wife's pregnant, and realized, hey, this isn't what I want. And so you took the necessary steps. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first chasm. You did get a business coach too, so I want to reiterate that. That's been one of the big themes. We just had our last series with Michael Sutton, Tools to $10 million, and he was very big on coaching and networking groups and learning from others. Most highly successful people are very big into that. So that's another really important point I want to note. But that first big chasm, project management, what happened after that? What was your next big scary chasm?
Honestly, it was my brother kind of transitioning from this other project management into some pseudo sales, general operation stuff. But that was about the same time we hired our first office person. Answering the phones became an issue because if I'm out estimating or running projects, I'm not available to take down names, addresses, phone numbers, and set up quotes. And so that was an immediate need that we said, okay, we can hire someone to do this at a cheaper income expectation than myself and my brother as an owner. And let's do that. Let's hire an office staff. And the first person we hired was exactly what everyone thinks. They did a lot of general stuff. They were a very good first for me, but it became clear fairly on that they were not going to be part of the long-term solution of the company. They kind of exposed really what we needed in that job role. And that was one that was kind of interesting because it was the first hire that was a non-producer or at least part producer, right? It's just kind of
Yeah.
stagnant overhead and like, oh gosh, what happens? You mentioned if we get slow or the business has a rough patch, that salary becomes a giant issue now.
Sure.
And so that was scary as well. Also giving up some control because they'd have access to most of my books and some finances and some things like that was really intimidating at that point.
Yeah, that stuff is scary. I wanna touch on a couple of things here. So you said that basically it probably wasn't the right hire, right?
Mhm.
This person wasn't the best fit long term. But and I think that's a big thing that's scary for people, especially when they're first starting this hiring journey of bringing on more people. What if you hire the wrong person? How do I know that they're the right person? I don't know how to do the interview and vet them correctly. You hired the wrong person, we'll just say it that way, but they helped you expose what you need. What do
Yeah.
you mean by that?
Well, they started to, I had to put some systems in place to make sure that I was getting value out of them. So some weekly recurring appointments of when does that person post on social media? And this is 12 years ago, so it's a different world now, but a lot of it still holds true. How do we handle bank deposits? Now we have scanners on our desk. We don't ever go to the bank. At that time, we went to the bank and dropped off checks.
Sure.
Scheduling some of those things became important. When I hired them, I wasn't aware of how much I would actually have to script their job. I think because I was busy, I was hoping to get someone that would kind of come in and help write these. With this person, we really had to have that standardized so that I felt confident that things were getting done in the right order for the business, the crews, myself, our customers, everybody. And so, just like the scheduling of the oil changes, we just started to schedule Facebook posts at that time. And that was just a calendar appointment that got checked off 2-3 times a week. When things were turned in and how stuff with the little bit of accounting they did was done. I kind of worked through that with her because I felt a little out of control. I felt like I didn't know what was going on, and it was much more therapeutic for me to see a checked off task and know that those posts were done rather than search for them and find them. I kind of wanted to see that at one spot. And with that job, for me, it's kind of hard to come up with these key performance indicators like you can with field staff because it's easy to look at production and things like that. And with this job, it was really intimidating because it's so vague, especially your first go at it. It's just very out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've experienced it myself. You hire someone, you just kind of hope they'll plug in and they'll work,
Yeah.
or they'll figure it out, or they'll make it better. Oftentimes they don't. Especially when you've been kind of doing everything, and then it's one of your first hires, and there's no real clear onboarding, there's no real clear training, there's not even really a super clear job role. You just know, like, hey, there's a whole lot of crap that we're doing at the office that we don't have time to do. Can you do it?
Yeah. Yep. And I think it probably was the right thing for me. I hired somebody that was a general office staff type of role, a general admin role. Her replacement, who's now my business manager, has been with me for a decade. She came from a much harder straight accounting role because that is a weak spot of mine. I mean, reading the reports and doing that is not an issue. I like that now. But I needed somebody, the replacement, that was going to be much more into inputting every transaction and sorting stuff through the accounting programs the way that we need it so that I can make decisions based on good data rather than feelings. And we kind of overcorrected and took a little less, general admin type of approach to it and more of, a CFO type of mentality with it with Chris now.
And I guess you lean that direction after seeing some of the weakness of the first person, that they just didn't have that skill set.
Because I felt like a lot of what we had that person doing, our project managers could do some of that. The guys like sharing their posts. They like, showing the world what they did. And so that requirement was less valuable to me than getting the accounting exactly right and tight and where we wanted it so that we could make a decision.
Sure. If you could go back, this is kind of a loaded question. I'm not even sure if you'll have a clear answer to this one. But if you were making that initial hire again, would you rather hire someone like the person that you did, who's basically going to say, hey, this clearly didn't work out the best, you need to dial in some SOPs here for the person? Or would you rather hire someone like that second person who would maybe come in and actually could potentially succeed in the role and actually help you craft the role from day one?
Yeah, good question. So my opinion, you have to have the first person. I don't think the second person, Chris wouldn't have taken the job 3 years earlier.
She
Uh,
just walk in and walk out.
she would have said no thanks. And when she told me her income requirements and that she doesn't work Fridays, I was like, what? I got her from a referral network. She was a friend of an optometrist in a network I was in. And he said, I'm telling you, mentally, you guys match up perfectly. She's 20 years older than you in a female version, but you guys think identically. And
Yeah,
you gotta go with her. But I almost think it's similar to dating. I mean, I started dating my wife in high school, but I had girlfriends before that. Do you
sure.
think you're further off having no experience and falling right into your relationship with your wife or husband or whatever? Or are you better off having a couple failures to realize that that's not what I want? This type of thing is important to me. And I don't know if you start off with the right one that you're gonna not second guess it so much. I think
Yeah,
you gotta have a little failure in there to say, okay, I like this and this about it, but man, next time, we're gonna go this way. We talk to our crews about that all the time when we bring in a new hire. It's an opportunity to kind of get back to what we know we should be doing, eliminate a couple bad habits, and elevate our expectations again, because we can kind of reinvent ourselves when we get a new person that starts a little bit and step it up every single time. Where it's kind of hard to come in with the first one, I think, and think you nailed it. I don't think it happens much.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have never thought of it like that. Um, sometimes not every episode, but sometimes on episodes I'll get hit with one or two things that kind of stuns me, and that
Mhm.
one just did, because I think back to all the hires that I've made and the lessons learned along the way and all the disappointments with different team members, and it is like dating.
Yeah,
And you do get much better basically by figuring out what doesn't work, what you don't like, what doesn't fit. You kind of narrow into the ideal candidate
yeah.
is the journey I've experienced.
And I think with hiring that first office admin type person, I think having a list of things you believe you do well and don't do well kind of frames that hire. And
Yeah,
go into it thinking this is going to be a great relationship, it's going to
sure.
last forever. But
Yeah, don't hire on being like, this will be the dog, you know?
yeah, you're temporary. Don't do that.
Yeah,
But I think if you do that, you're saying, hey, these are some weaknesses that I have that are you capable of filling these?
yeah,
And I asked Chris, who's still with us now, and she has plaques on her desk that say business owner. And it's really not that big of a joke around here. I mean, if someone says, I need to talk to the owner, she'll grab the phone. But if someone is comfortable coming in with a little less than stellar process, that's who you have to have,
yeah,
right? So either a person that's younger or newer in the workforce might be a great fit because they're learning this too. Their expectations aren't to come in to this polished, fine running machine. They're okay coming in and helping you work through some of these things. And so that was our first one, and she was. I think the business just had some different needs, and it ended amicably, but
sure.
it was clear this was not going to be the right long-term solution.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Okay, so first chasm, give up project management. Second chasm, the office manager hire. We'll call it office manager, and what that kind of caused, and giving up the control, opening the financials, whole lot of stuff you were pretty uncomfortable with. Third chasm,
Sales.
sales.
Sales. I did the sales even with, running 3 or 4 crews, and the office manager in place. I did 100% of the sales for a while and really liked it. I was successful at it and I enjoyed the customer contact. Remember, I had worked myself out of being in people's homes. So it gets kind of lonely being a business owner if you're not in the job sites and doing things. And I held on to that probably a little too long, probably about a year too long, where I started to work myself too much doing those quotes. I was not a big fan of ever doing things on nights and weekends especially. So I worked at like maximum pace efficiency from, 5:30 a.m. to 5:30 or 6 p.m. during that, with no room for error, and it just wasn't super enjoyable. So
It
hiring that
sounds
salesperson,
awful.
no, hiring that salesperson was another one because I really loved that. I still love that. If I can
Yeah,
leave my office and go and do something, I'd love to just go quote projects. And that was hard to give up. The first gentleman I hired for that had some sales and construction background. He worked for a plumbing company where the service techs kind of quoted and did the work. And he was a really good first hire for that job. He had some of the techniques on closing in the home and things like that I was probably soft in. I relied on my expertise of what we do. And when I left an estimate, they knew where we were going to start in the home. They knew how many days it were going to take. They knew how it looked. I'd tell them at the end of the first day, your trim will be done and this will be done. I sold them through just comfort and knowing the
sure.
process. where he was my first exposure in a little bit more of the sales techniques and trying to observe hot buttons and address them, and do that, because he had construction knowledge, but he didn't have the painting acumen that I had. And so that was helpful. He made us better in really looking at this more of that sales, process of how to walk people through this and not create places for them to, escape out of it without being overly pushy and, demanding that they sign before we leave the driveway.
Yeah.
He was very helpful with that.
Would you say that your overall sales process now at MacFarland Painting, is it more reflective of the way that he came in?
No, I think it was reverted back to my way.
Is it? Okay.
It's very soft from a real sales process. We don't quote most jobs in the home. We email quotes within 24 hours. They have a type proposal. But it's very much, we are estimators and not salespeople. Our fifth sales guy that we hired has a sales background, and he's been really good in the room with the other sales staff that we have that are much more, 20-year project manager types, and a former insurance adjuster, writer who was very technically accurate in terms of measurements and takeoff in square footage, but lacking in the personal sales side of it. And so that sales room now is pretty well balanced in terms of skill sets. We have a former PPG store manager that we hired 2 years ago. We have a guy who owned his own company for a few years, worked for another large painting outfit out this way, who finally just wanted the ease and predictability of this life. So our mold for who that is, the skill sets are really pretty varied. The results are eerily similar, but we kind of sell, they're calling us because they need us. This isn't like a sewer backing up in an emergency. Generally, what we do is a luxury item, with the exception of exterior painting, that's a maintenance deal. It's generally a want. And so we kind of sell it from the aspect of, this is fun and exciting and you're going to love it. And we're going to eliminate all the pain of X, Y, and Z to get this project to go through. We're not going to be in your home for 2 months and in your way, and we address those things. And that's really our sales focus now, is much more of, we're estimating what you want and telling you, or quoting what you want, and you'll be happy with it.
So when you brought in another estimator because you were working too much, it was, I guess, a little bittersweet because you really enjoy that part of the job, but was it scary?
Oh yeah. Yeah, because, and then the numbers are scary. So that person has a learning curve, right? And they're not going to come in and close at your rate. I mean, it's, in my case, the company name is mine, and a lot of us have it that way, right? So it's not that hard for John MacFarland to hand a business card and sell a MacFarland painting job. It's a little different for Tom Smith to hand a card for this other company. And so their numbers are not going to be as good as yours, and accepting that was a challenge. Trying to come with a fair balance point of like, okay, I sold at this closing rate, yours is here. What's realistic, and putting some of those systems in place to actually compensate them that way was important early on. And so we implemented, probably the second month they were here, a closing percentage bonus, because I felt like that's their efficiency. They can't control how many quotes they do that much. That's kind of on me. And generally our market and our offerings determine the average sale, but that efficiency, they've already called us, right? We don't force people to get painting quotes. So what are you doing with those leads when you're in the home? That was the first metric that we put into place from a bonus standpoint that I think is critical. But for me, it was kind of hard to take my rate at 65 or 70% and lop that all the way down to 45 or 50% and be happy about that, because my thought was, oh my gosh, I got all these, crew members out here depending on us. And this guy's not doing his part. And at what point does this just run us dry where we're not getting the same return on it? And so that was terrifying, honestly, for a good little bit, probably 6 months, seeing those numbers, and just being like, okay, they're getting better, but they weren't getting better fast enough for me.
Yeah. So how did you, I guess, do it then? So like for the project management, the building, the data, right? So I know you rely on data a lot, but when you're looking at this estimator and it's not getting there as quickly as you want it to get there, what did you do, or what would you recommend that people do?
I got back in the car with them, back in the van with them, and did some training and had him follow me and follow my lead. And the numbers, even with both of us together, which is just inherently very awkward, were much more similar to my numbers than they were his. And when we flip-flopped, and I tried like hell to keep my mouth shut, as he was missing things that I felt like were critical to mention to a homeowner, like the fish tank and, moving that or things like that. We'd get in the car and I'd say, hey, you missed this. We'll fix it. I didn't want to throw you off your game and say it in the home. Before we start the project, we got to talk to him about their fish tank or the grand piano or the whatever. And he got better at it, but it took a little while. But getting in the home and watching him do it, in fact, I felt like there was almost a little bit of customers being turned off to the sales pitch, where they kind of felt like, okay, enough. You're trying to just gland hand me. I don't really want to talk to you about the weather and my kids and all these other things. I want you to just be professional and do what I'm asking you to do, and then get the heck out of my house in 30 minutes and give me my quote. They didn't want to be best friends. And I felt like he was misreading, because he was such a nice, personable guy, the kind of the cues from clients that are like, I just want this to be a little bit more professional and I have stuff to do. You sound like a very nice guy, but please get out of my home so I can go about my day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how I feel. I think it's how a lot of, the target demographic, upper end homeowners, they're usually fairly busy. They usually have things going on, and they probably already have friends.
Yeah.
So they didn't call the estimator to come out to make a new best friend.
No. And so we script time. I mean, we have that now. We didn't have it as tight then, but we actually, have some numbers that we say, okay, if this is a straight exterior paint, it should be 30 minutes door to door in your car to back in the car. And how we do that is we actually walk through how we want that done. And so when you're turning this over, you have to write down what you do and you think you do well. And for me, homeowners can be a little bit of a challenge over your shoulder. They start talking to you, you start missing measurements or stop writing down stuff, you start talking about stuff. So I would do a walkthrough with the homeowner, make a list of what I'm quoting, and then I turn them away and say, give me 10 minutes. I need to do some data retrieval. I need to do some measurements. I need to do some calculations. And then I'm going to walk you back through and say, okay, so I noticed this piece of wood here needs to be replaced. That's how I'm going to write it down in the quote. And so we wrote the process to follow that, because I feel like, our first sales guy was doing this more like his other job, where it was different. He sold plumbing stuff. So people had a failure and they wanted it repaired that day. And I think it was a little easier. And maybe the approach of being a really nice, likable person might have softened this expense for a hot water heater. Ours was a different product that we're selling. So that can't be done the same way.
That's interesting. Yeah. They might almost be looking for a reason to not hire him when he comes out for such a pressing need.
Yeah.
Whereas for painting, I mean, they can really take their time. This is a luxury item.
Yeah, for sure. And so we scripted what we think to be an appropriate amount of time. And we have 6 people now. We had another woman start on Monday. She's selling cabinets only. But with our other 5, there's a pretty big discrepancy in the amount of time some of them are in the homes. And a lot of that is personality based. So we can give a little bit in that. We have one gentleman who's got 30 years field experience. He's short in a house. But his go-to is, people can tell he's done this 17 different ways and there's nothing he hasn't seen and remedied. And that's what he leans on. The guy that was a former, big box paint store manager, he's got much more of a personality and he wants to talk to people about things, and both work and they work similar. But that rough framework of the amount of time and then doing the talk with the customer, now they're giving the customer a tablet or a photo book on cabinets and some options and things like that to kind of politely move them out of their way. And bring them back in and say, okay, I got what I needed. This is how I'm going to quote this, and this. Does that make sense? But we actually have scripted that down where, they're doing it the way that I did it, where when I turned him loose, I was really kind of enamored with his skill set and I gave him too much freedom. And then, irritated, he wasn't performing really well. So.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. For interior, our interior and exterior, do you guys have timing on that? What does that look like?
Yeah, we do. I mean, standard appointment is a half an hour. I will tell you that half of our guys use every second of that and half don't. I like a half an hour because I feel like as a consumer, more than that, you get that feeling like you talked about. I'm busy and I like you, but no offense, I have other things to do. So see you later. If you're organized, you should be able to answer all the typical questions. How many days does this take? What are their responsibilities? What are our responsibilities? When are they getting the quote? How does the process of actually accepting the work look? How far out are we booked? What about colors? You can do all that very regimented in less time than 30 minutes and still get good data. Our sales staff takes photos and makes notes of every room or space. And so that stuff takes a little bit of time. and then kind of the recap at the end to say, okay, did I miss anything? This is what I'm going to quote, so that we don't have they get 3 estimates and they forget that they didn't take us into the formal dining room and the kitchen area because, they're kind of on autopilot and then that's missed off a quote. So we go through and we recap that. And we're trying to do a half an hour for a pretty standard interior paint. Our average interior paint project is about $3,500. Average exterior is about $4,500 in our market, depending on how many rooms we're painting or what we're doing. And so that half an hour model works for those. We have some where we're doing interiors and exteriors, or it's a giant house, or it's cabinets too. And so maybe that goes to an hour.
Sure.
But generally 30 minutes for us has us in a good position to get what we need without bothering folks.
Yeah, no, I like it, man. Sounds like you guys have it really dialed in. So those are 3 pretty big chasms. Are there any others that have occurred? Sounds like these are all basically hires.
They're all hires. I mean, so the part of the control. So right now we have an operations manager, and they deal with most general small headaches that business owners do. That was one person that we had in the field as a project manager that got a promotion through our growth. And I will tell you, that's one person that I think personality matters way more than the systems. He's impervious to stress. He doesn't get rattled. He doesn't make rash decisions. He's very calm. He drives me nuts because I think he's slow at times, but he balances my immediate solve this and get on to the next, type of mentality. He kind of softens that, which is helpful for us. And so that's one that a personality of giving up that stuff and not knowing what's going on. I don't really want to admit it, but we painted a project at my aunt and uncle's last week, and I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I would have liked to pop in and say hi to them, but honestly, it was probably better for everyone that I didn't. The crews knew. Family, it was friends and family referral source. The note said, John's aunt and uncle, and they gave him a 10 out of 10 project. And, they messaged me and they were elated. But until I got their text, I had no idea we were even there. I knew that we had quoted for them. And to me, as weird as that sounds, that tells me we're doing it right. The systems are running itself. I don't have to run over there and say, hey, it's my very picky aunt and uncle, guys. Please make sure that we, don't leave dust behind and we don't do this or we do this exactly right. Where I was guilty of that before, just having too much control. And the painters find that irritating and they don't want you around, honestly.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Let them do their job.
Yeah.
Essentially. Wow. Okay, cool, man. So these are pretty big chasms. I guess what overall thoughts or suggestions do you have? Sounds like for you it was less of a fear-based mentality. I guess it's all kind of a fear-based mentality, but more around control versus the finances, or it's going to break or something like that. But for people listening who are hesitant to hire certain positions, maybe hesitant to employ certain automations, maybe hesitant to change a process, they've estimated for a certain way for so long and now they're trying to do a different method of job costing or whatever that is. How can they mentally approach that for success?
I think if you feel like you have a good way of doing it, there's some things that are non-negotiable, but remaining open enough to letting someone put their own stamp on it. If you're hiring a salesperson, let them try it, run the numbers and see where they're at. Same thing with project management. If they feel like they have a little bit of a different personality and they want to do things a little differently, what's negotiable and what's not. 2 coats and everything, this type of prep, that's non-negotiable. That is what it is. But, do they like using a certain type of tape or not? Let it go, see what happens. And you have to do some site visits and check on those things if you're making concessions. I think there's some business owners that expect this to be turnkey and get hands off too quick and get themselves in trouble. So I think you make a list of things that maybe you're a little uneasy with. And those are the things you actually go and get eyes on and evaluate. Safety concerns on outside. I had one of my top exterior guys, he'd make every insurance guy run for the hills because he's reckless and he's never had a problem, but he's damn well not the guy that's training our guys on exterior painting because I can't make his method standard all the time. Controlling him is an issue.
Hanging off the roof with one arm.
Hanging off the roof and reaching too far on ladders and just doing stuff like that, admittedly we've all done, but as you get a little bit bigger and there's more at stake, you can't do it the same way. Those safety protocols have to be put in place so that you're protected from a lawsuit or someone getting hurt or anything like that. And, so for me, just being real with yourself and actually figuring out what you need to still be involved with and checking in on those. And until you get some data, what's the worst thing that happens? You hire somebody, it doesn't work out. You say, hey, gosh, I was ready to get up sales and I'm just not, the numbers aren't there. But I think the next one you try to hire, you're going to be in a much better situation to figure out, okay, that personality or that person didn't work because of this. And now this is non-negotiable. That person that I'm going to hire needs to be highly organized, independent, or not, or whatever is important to you. Our sales staff, one of the biggest issues we deal with, one of them is he runs early to appointments. And I feel like it's almost as irritating to be 15 minutes early to an estimate or to call somebody to move it up as it is being 5 minutes late. And so that's one thing we deal with him a lot. I can check our CRM and I can see his pictures and stuff, and I know the log time. And it's one thing we're like, Brad, love you, but calling these people to move up. My wife, who has 4 kids, she would be as irritated by that as somebody being 10 minutes late. And they may not tell you that, but you're kind of starting off with this guy doesn't respect my time. We said noon. He's calling me at 11 and wants to come at 11:30. I want noon. That's what I scripted my day around. So those things, like we have standardized time. We don't do hour blocks. We say noon, we're there at noon. We don't say between noon and 1. I feel like that's paralyzing for the consumer. Sure. I got to sit around and wait. I can't get into mowing my lawn or doing laundry or doing something with the kids. I can't run errands if I have this 1 hour window. So we're non-negotiable on that. I've had sales staff that's been hired in saying, oh, this would be a lot easier if we had some flexibility. Now the system dictates it. Our current office staff schedules our routes based on geography, and they know our area and they give people adequate time. If you're doing 30 minutes in a home, you have more than enough time. And 9 times out of 10, you're probably stalling at a Starbucks parking lot and roughing out some figures on your notes or responding to emails way more than you are running late to an appointment, or pressing to do that. So, for us, those things being non-negotiable, that time was one of them. I said in the last segment, our biggest sales tools are competitors. My line back in the day was, did they arrive on time? Were they professional? Do they answer your phone calls? Did they send the quote on time? Are they licensed? Are they insured? Do they have good reviews and references? And if they can check those boxes, then we'll talk about a price match. Very few people can check those boxes. And so that was kind of my go-to to just let them know, hey, get another quote. I'd love that. You're going to have mine today or tomorrow. You're going to have to call the other guy back and wonder where your proposal is generally. And if that's how it is, to give us the money, what is it going to be like in a year if you have another problem or something pops up or you notice a touch up that we all missed on a walkthrough? You think that guy's going to be responsive? Probably not. And so some of those things that we script into some general talking scripts for sales staff, I think is important, especially if you feel like you're good at that and you're going to hire more of a person to just kind of check boxes and do a process than help you invent your sales process. You probably want to have some of those things in there. How do you introduce yourself? What's acceptable conversations on friends, family? You see a picture, do you really want your guys talking about family and kids or not? I'm okay with it to some regard, but that first estimator, he had 4 kids as well. And that was his fallback every single time, was to talk about children and kids. And I think at times people felt like that might be a crutch and a lack of confidence in what he actually was there to do. And they don't want to talk about Susie's T-ball and things like that necessarily at that time. They just want the quote done. So,
yeah, man, you just gave us a lot to unpack. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that it's not all just, okay, hire and let it go. That's basically what the majority of this episode has been about. But there are certain things that are non-negotiable. You as a business owner ultimately are still responsible for everything. Mm-hmm. So you can't just abdicate responsibility or just hope, it works out and we'll go kiss a few frogs kind of deal. There are certain things that are non-negotiable that must be protected, and like liability and other things like that you were talking about. I think getting really, really clear on that. And then also kind of allowing some of the other stuff to be a little bit more fluid, potentially, at least for some amount of time. Maybe ultimately you get it kind of like the McDonald's model and you're just real smooth and it's pretty consistent. But for when you're starting hiring and you're starting scaling, what super matters? What are the things that really, really matter? Focus on those 20%, the other 80%, have them roughly sketched out, and then continue to refine and improve as you go.
Yeah.
John, do you have This is excellent, man. Do you have anything else to add? Any other thoughts prior to wrapping up this second episode here?
Um, I think in terms of these chasms that you're talking about, one of them is expectations of time. And I'll give you an example with Chris. She's been with me for about 9 years now. I have never once received a phone call, text, or email when I'm marked off on my calendar. Not once. And to me, I do the same thing. I don't text. If I find out a project manager is texting his crew off hours, that's a big deal. That's going to be hammered down with us because we don't do that. The systems, the calendar's in place. If you need to tell somebody, oh, I'm changing this job and you got to go here and do that, it doesn't happen at 7, 8 o'clock at night. It doesn't happen on a Sunday afternoon. And so for me, kind of setting those expectations of when we're at work, I'm all in. You need something, let's go. I'll drop everything I'm doing, hop in the truck, get to your job site, troubleshoot it, fix it, help you finish it in time, whatever it is. But for me, that was critical too, to have that go both ways, that work-life balance. We sell that to our new hires a lot because these are people that have been text in the morning, the address you're supposed to go to. No one wants to work in that environment. So standardizing that expectation, because I did it for myself and they knew not to bother John because they were going to get backlash. But then I found out a couple of years ago that they're doing it with their subordinates. And it's like, no, they're not calling you with problems in the evening. I don't want you texting and calling, them off hours. It just, that shows me we have a break in the chain of organization. Let's fix that, because I don't want to do this one-off every single week with people. And so I think if you're letting go of some of this control, setting in those expectations, generally us entrepreneurs are control freaks at first. And so you might want to text them or email them and ask them how that estimate went. But if it's past 6 p.m. or whatever your rules of engagement are, sit on your phone, throw your phone away, get rid of it. You can't and I'm huge on that here. We have those expectations are really, really important, because at times you feel like, why am I doing this? Is this worth all the effort? And it's not, if you're getting phone calls and texts and emails when you're supposed to be unplugged and, doing something with your kids or family or to yourself or whatever you're doing. So that's a huge thing here that I felt like was really important. And honestly, it didn't happen until I heard Chris, because my mentality was I was okay with those. I wanted to be in the loop. And she said when she hired in, you will not hear from us when you're gone. Her first couple months, we had a crazy job. Guy bought a new home. Builder painted all of it, but he wanted us to do color on walls. There was an issue with he didn't actually close in time. And he wanted us to go in there and just start painting when he didn't actually own it. And she just said no. Customer went ballistic, real high-end home. He was a doctor and thought he could just, push his weight around. And she said, there's not a chance this is happening. I don't care if you fire us or whatever. I'll deal with John next Tuesday when he comes back. And, not that it wasn't stressful for them, but she said, hey, this happened. I had to make a call. And I said, nope, you're 100% right. If the builder wasn't going to sign off and say it was fine for us to paint, and that's all we asked for, just write us a letter saying, the closing's not done, but you guys can paint walls. The builder said, no way in hell. And so we're not doing that. And so getting people like that, it's kind of a weird balance. You have to, at different times, I hired people that had skill sets that filled needs. And then you have times or people that have skill sets that are more cerebral that you don't need, or they take something from you, or they control you. I know, hiring Chris and that office staff caused me to be much more fiscally responsible. And I was accountable to them because they knew the money. So if I was charging stupid stuff or buying, an extra truck cat for my truck that was not work related, I was uncomfortable doing that once they knew those things. And so it forced me to be much more responsible, where maybe it was hard for me, in my late 20s to do that. I wanted some new mud tires on my car and work was going to pay for them. And this all made sense. And let's just do this. When you have that open level of accountability, it's not as easy to say, no, it's definitely a business expense. I had to have this. And
you had to.
Definitely did not,
MacFarland Painting would not be where it is today if you didn't have that.
Yeah. And that was a little uncomfortable for me too, because it's my money. What are you talking about?
It's your kingdom. Now you have some accountability.
Yeah. But, so that was kind of a challenge too, to get comfortable with, letting go of that absolute control, and I could do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then there's plenty of money to buy a lift kit and tires for your truck.
Sure.
But you're not doing it the way that we all did it before, where, you're kind of scamming on everything of taxes, and that's how you're actually profitable, is because you just cheat your taxes to death. You
Just
know, I got a
beat the
great
heck out of your
CPA.
taxes.
So that's another one, the CPA. I mean, I transitioned CPAs about that same time, 2012. And I went from coming in and having a guy who would just go more or less up and down and see what I had at the end of the year and then that's what we pay taxes on, to much more planning. And I was intimidated because I thought this CPA is going to think I'm an idiot. He's not going to want to work with me. That's all of their clients. And he said, no, we're gonna make you more money just planning. We're going to have good plans. I'm going to be able to tell you when you can, you know, lease another space, when you can buy another van, if you should finance outright, or do you pay cash for a cheap used vehicle and just do the repairs? And so, you know, that's part of it too, is just realizing there are some resources that are going to get you there faster. If you just check your ego a little bit and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I need some help. You know, my previous CPA allowed me to just do this totally haphazardly. And I need someone to kind of tell me no, you know, can you be that guy? And the gentleman I've been with for 11, 12 years now, he is that guy. He will say no. And then he'll also say, hey, your meals and entertainment are wildly low. Go spend it.
Yeah.
You know, so sitting down with those people in October, November is much more critical than doing it at the end of the year and coming in with your pile of receipts and saying, hey, I got $4,000 to pay in taxes. I didn't pay my quarterly stuff. How do I do this? Well, we all did that, you know, but it's not the right way to do it. And that's stressful in itself.
It is.
I
You don't
wouldn't
know
want to
what
get
kind of
out of it.
liability you have waiting for you.
And then, you know, and at that stage when you're doing it, you don't have the resources to get out of it. Where now it'd be a blip on the radar. You're fine. Come in and look at whatever you want. You're not going to find enough to matter, so it's not stressful. But when I had more control over it, and I was probably a little bit embarrassed about the lack of profitability in the company, I didn't want to be open and honest. That cycle of like fear and not being open with these professionals kind of creates this thing you just can't get out of until you say, you know what? I'm not good at that part of it. I need someone to actually tell me yes or no, or when or how, because I don't have a degree in tax, and I need someone to really, really direct me. So you know, that was important too. Probably before you start hiring, because if they're good, they can take away some fear and say, hey, I know you don't have an extra $60,000 at the end of the year to hire this office admin, but if we do a couple things, you'll have it the next week to week to get them in, and then things will get better. Your company
can help you financially forecast it.
Yeah. And so, you know, things like that, I think just can't be understated. I think it's wildly important for me to have those relationships with people that know way more than I do and just tell me yes or no, or, you know.
Yeah. And being willing to, I guess, look or feel stupid, you know, just, hey, this isn't my area of expertise. That's why I hired you. And not, and I guess being willing to be a little bit vulnerable so that you can get the help that you need for your business.
Yeah.
John, that was good, man. That was deep.
Yeah.
That was deep. Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode quite a bit, man. So on that was episode 2. What do we got? What did I say? Episode 3 is coming up. We will be covering systems for your office and sales. I am looking forward to that, especially now that we got a preview of basically everything that went wrong and then how it got fixed.
Yeah. And I think that you have to know, if I came on and just said, oh, we do X, Y, and Z, it's like, holy cow, how do I implement all that? Well, everyone is through failure, and you do learn more from the ones that don't work out. The people that work out, it's just like the great, good customers. They get forgotten about, unfortunately. It's the people that were total nightmares that you can recall their name and street address. And I can tell you paint colors from 15 years ago by people that were miserable to work for. And there's been thousands of just great people that are, well, that's just what we expect, you know? So those failures is what allows you to start to do. And hopefully I can try to keep things in kind of chronological order for the systems, but some of these things that, you know, I'm throwing in there, they happen as it evolves. Like the time in the home was one that we had to figure out what was not working before we figured out, okay, no, he's spending too much time in the house and he's just irritating folks a little bit. And, you know, it's got to be more exact.
No more T-ball. No more T-ball talk.
You know, that stuff's fine at the end, but customers that want to talk about it will lead with, you know, they'll open that door. You know, they'll say, do you have kids? And then game on, you can talk about kids. But
take their lead.
It's just a weird kind of, it's a weird crutch if it's not appropriate.
Yeah. All right, John, really appreciate your time, man. Excited for the next episode. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Brandon.
If you want to learn more about the topics we discussed in this podcast and how you can use them to grow your painting business, visit paintermarketingpros.com/podcast for free training, as well as the ability to schedule a personalized strategy session for your painting company. Again, that URL is paintermarketingpros.com/podcast. Hey there, painting company owners. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give us your feedback. Let us know how we did. And also, if you're interested in taking your painting business to the next level, make sure you visit the Painter Marketing Pros website at paintermarketingpros.com to learn more about our services. You can also reach out to me directly by emailing me at brandon@paintermarketingpros.com, and I can give you personalized advice on growing your painting business. Until next time, keep growing.